The topic today on the Neil Wilkins podcast is what is AI generated content? I think we all think we know, but we have an expert in the house today who is going to share with us really what's going on here. So Kabir Hemrajani joins me, and Kabir is really at the forefront of cutting edge technology in terms of how to manage this stuff because, as we're going to hear, this is not an easy thing to do properly. Everybody's doing it, but not everybody is doing it correctly. So welcome to the show, Kabir.
Thank you for having me, Neil. I'm so excited to be here and share some thoughts around what we're doing with AI content nowadays.
Yeah, because everybody's dabbling, aren't they? Everybody's trying this stuff. Everybody's dipped into ChatGPT, put a little prompt in and thought, wow, look at what I can do. Aren't I clever? And then either kind of left it alone and just moved aside, or they've thought, I need to go deeper. There's something really quite profound that's going on here. And I guess there are kind of two camps here. How are you seeing this sort of playing out in your work?
I think it's very interesting. I will find that there is a definite, very strange distribution where some folks have kind of done exactly what you described. They'll try out ChatGPT, they'll see what it's working for, and then they pause and they just kind of go away from it. And then at the other end of the distribution, you get the folks who are just kind of like have converted themselves into meat suits basically for the AI. So they're just like, what should I eat for breakfast today? And the AI tells them, and then they just go make that thing. They're like, this is so much better than having to figure out what I was going to go do otherwise. So to be frank, I don't think either end is totally appropriate. You got to find some middle. And so I think it's really important to try to play with the tools, figure out how it fits into your workflow, figure out what it's actually good for. I think in general, the piece that I tend to lean on the most is that AI has zero taste. It does not know good from bad at all. I think humans are still going to be curators, and it's really up to the individual to figure out whether or not what AI is suggesting is good or bad, and continually like push it to help you refine ideas that you have in your head and bring them into the world.
I just want to hook into a word that you just used there, Kabir, which was workflows. I think that's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because for most of us who have played, and I will put my hands on up here and say, yeah, I play with a lot of these AIs, and it's really fun. It's exciting, and it opens up opportunities. But for me, the trick is when I can spot a linkage between the tech and the opportunity and something that I need to solve, or something that I'm doing, or something that I could make more efficient. So rather than just doing it because it's clever, which I think is a trap a lot of us have fallen into, it's doing it because it's important, isn't it? Is that where the kind of the idea of aligning it with workflows comes into play?
Yeah, absolutely. I think trying to figure out how to make it work throughout your day where it's not disconnected is a huge challenge. I think the current status quo for work is you are talking about work with your team inside of a tool like Slack, or maybe it's Microsoft Teams, and then you switch over to something else, maybe it's a Google Doc or Notion, and then you're constantly copying and pasting back and forth from ChatGPT. And what I find is that that process tends to be very broken because AI really can give you the best advice if it has full context on a task. And by breaking it up into that workflow, you've done the exact opposite, right? You've got this conversation about what you're supposed to be working on in Slack that AI has no idea what you guys talked about. You've switched over to Notion. Let's imagine you're trying to come up with headlines for something. You go to ChatGPT, say, give me 10 headlines about this subject. It has no idea who the audience is for that content. It's going to give you completely generic answers. You need to be able to also understand, like, what does that audience find appealing? Do you want this to be humorous? Do you want this to be playful or exciting? Like, what do you want your audience to feel when they read whatever you're producing? And so I think the workflow piece of it is a huge part of why a lot of people fail at content generation with AI today. They are not able to articulate all of the things up front, and generally they find that when they do that process, they kind of just go back to what they were doing prior, right? Like, let me just stick to what I know, because why am I feeding this AI a bunch of context that's just eating up a bunch of my time that I could have spent just writing the article in the first place? So I think about it a lot like that, but I think that some of those things are basically just building blocks, right? You gotta lay the foundation and get your workflow right, where it's very easy to start feeding those kinds of things to AI, so that when you start that task, it's not tedious, it's not overwhelming, it's very, very simple.
Mm. Oh, you've got me thinking now, Kabir. You really have, because so now, yeah, there's many kind of facets to this, aren't there? Because if you're using multiple, I guess let's call them apps, which are potentially AI powered, but maybe they're AI linked. So with something like, I don't know, make.com or Pabbly, something that is a kind of a workflow aggregator, to use a word that kind of just implies that these apps are now joined together. You raise a really interesting question there, because if each of these apps is not passing on the context to the next part of the workflow, we've got an issue here, haven't we? Because yes, the very first step in the process might work perfectly, but as soon as it then hands over to the next step, all of that context is gone. Do you know, I hadn't really thought about that. I was just assuming, of course, that the context, the content, the action gets passed on or handed over to the next step in the workflow. But of course, it doesn't, does it? Each one is going to need to be briefed to bring that context through to the final conclusion, which might be post this social media post.
Mhm.
Without that, it's almost clueless, isn't it? This is important stuff.
Yeah, I think that the context piece is one of the key things that keeps people from really pushing more and more of their work over to AI, because they just don't understand exactly, like, I mean, fundamentally, I think when you're thinking about creative ideas, you have to think about it from that perspective, but then take yourself outside of that loop and just say, what does the audience think of this? Like, remove everything I have about this grand idea. Does it still does it still convey the same concept to the audience? And I think AI can help you with that process, but it also creates kind of like these hidden areas where you're like, I'm just describing everything in my head. You don't really understand exactly which context AI has picked up from that. And I think you're highlighting it, which is, you use this tool, it produces an output. You actually don't know what it thought of that output. You can see it go wrong sometimes, but you don't really know exactly where. And that's a huge challenge.
Do you think it'll ever get there? Because I mean, it seems that with a lot of this kind of conversation that's going on, and depends which media you follow to kind of keep in touch with all of this AI stuff. I mean, it seems to opinion is going in so many different directions right now. But do you feel hopeful that at some point in the hopefully not too distant future, AI itself will figure this out and will think, hold on a minute, I need to be a bit more collaborative. I can't just work with what I've got. I need to kind of share that processing power, or I need to share kind of how I came to that conclusion or that piece of content, and almost sort of self-evaluate how much quality there was involved in it. I'm thinking, in terms of Perplexity, for example. We all know that if we use Perplexity, you can see the
Mhm.
sources of information that were used to come to that conclusion. Is that a good principle, do you think, for this kind of self-diagnosis? Because it feels like it's going to be really important to make this work.
I think, like, to speak to what you were describing earlier, I think that we are very quickly approaching a place where AI will be so embedded in each parts of these workflows that you start to get that context. I mean, for example, one of the tools I use is, and anybody can use any version of this, but you want, meeting recorders and transcribers. You want to be able to tell somebody when you join a call, hey, I'm transcribing this. But now you can take those call notes and make that part of the prompt that you're using when you want to generate a follow-up email, right? Let's recap everything that we discussed. Let's figure out exactly what the next steps are, and then also help me generate those next steps. But when you ask it to do that, now it suddenly understands, hey, here's everything that happened in this conversation. And then also, pulling in other materials that you may have. The person I was speaking to, let's find out a little bit about their background. Where did they go to school? What did they work on in the past? I think all of those things, you're going to start seeing little AI applications pick up those kinds of details and start feeding them to more central repositories. And I think like on the technical side, that is a limitation today, but we're finding that, for example, Google's Gemini tool has a context limit that's 1 million tokens, which is, about 4 to 5 times larger than ChatGPT. So you're seeing these tools develop enough technological like breakthroughs that you can start feeding it lots and lots of information, and it will retain all of it and be able to figure out and regurgitate exactly what you described from a small interaction.
And it is those kind of, I guess, recordings or the context of the real world then brought
Yeah.
into AI, which is going to, I'm going to hold back on the word intuition, but it gives the AI almost a human, not ability. I'm trying to find the right word here, but it gives it a humanness to work with, I
Yeah.
guess, if you're kind of doing, as you say, those transcription services and, real briefing. It's real world briefing. It's not contrived prompt engineering where we sit there for 20 minutes, as you say, and, try and create a context and all the background about the brand and the messages and this, and that. And we could have written the words ourselves, in that same
Yep.
amount of time. This is something that's almost drawing from the reality of the world around us and saying, okay, I've now got my context and my brief because I've been listening. And there's the human element coming into play. Do you feel that there's almost like a hybrid thing appearing here in front of us, and this hybrid thing will be that kind of humanness coming into the content? Or do you still see that for the foreseeable future there is a difference between human and AI content?
I To be completely honest, I don't know. I think that in general, what I find is that when I produce content, I spend a lot of my time curating it. Like, as I described earlier, I think that um, the ultimate thing that you can bring to that task is your taste and your sensibilities to be able to produce the best outputs. But there are those times where you're looking for a word, you're looking for a phrase or a way to describe an idea or different, analogies for it. And I think AI is fantastic at coming up with that like broad idea space, lots of different contexts and different ways that you can present thoughts to your audience. So I think it's very, very good at filling in those gaps, but a lot of it does depend on your ability to start collecting this kind of like background information, whether it is, transcriptions from meetings or other little things that you may have normally just completely disregarded, right? It's like there's all of this information that we collect that will give AI more context on a task. And you need to now find ways to capture that and effectively communicate it to AI in order to get those results.
So is what you're advocating then almost pressing the pause button on all the tech just for a moment and saying, okay, we know that there's a lot of capability. There's new platforms and new tools and new apps appearing literally by the day. It feels like by the hour. Trying to keep up with this stuff is really, really difficult. But if we were to press the pause button and actually properly reflect on one, what we're trying to achieve, two, what are those workflows that we talked about before, now three, that kind of almost that sensibility that we want to do less, but what we do needs to be a higher quality. Are you advocating a pause button here? Because it feels like that's going to take a bit of time to kind of get things in order before you then release the pause button and then start using AI.
I think I would do the exact opposite. I think of the the story that you hear sometimes is like you have this pottery class where the teacher just says, "I just need like one very, very great face. Just make me like one really fantastic example." And so you get the students who are like making a single thing a day, and it starts off terribly, but you get to the end and they're kind of like they've just refined it and iterated to greatness. And a lot of that is trying a bunch of stuff that is not going to work. But you have to try it to understand why it didn't work and do it a few times. And I think that analogy is the right one. If you're the one waiting for all of this stuff to congeal into one neat little package that lets you put in a couple things and then call it a day, I think that you're going to miss out on that iterative process that helps you really understand what's happening. And even when things kind of coalesce into exactly like this is the right tool for this task, I don't know that I don't know that you'll be there to spot it unless you're trying all the other tools that have failed. So I do think it's really, really important to just start playing with some of the stuff today, consistently. Put a block on your calendar of half an hour. Anytime somebody mentions some new tool or new thing that you should try, just make a note. Hey, today's the day I'm going to try out. The last tool I tried out because it just seemed like interesting was Mistral is one of the open source model providers. They just launched a chat application. It's free on your phone, so you're getting results that are kind of similar to ChatGPT, but completely free. So there's a case where no financial investment, but gives you a chance to go try out a different application. I think that's incredibly important. Like everybody should be playing with as many tools as they can find and trying to stay as much on the forefront. Because frankly, like the alternative is that things do coalesce, but maybe not in the shape that you thought they were going to, and now you have to learn a brand new skill set like overnight. So I would to take the opposite approach. I would not advocate for pausing at all. I would really just try to go full sail.
And I guess in lots of ways I do agree with you, Kabir, but I kind of sense that somebody might be listening to this and saying, well, it's okay for you guys. You control your own diaries, you've got your own businesses, you're doing stuff where you've got a vested interest in knowing this because you're either teaching or you're podcasting or you're the tech founder. So you kind of got to know this stuff. But I'm here responsible for, my employer's brand. And if I'm putting stuff out that's almost like being tested, it's a bit of a high risks and high stakes thing, isn't it? I mean, how would you kind of address that with somebody who kind of wants to do this, but because they work or they're employed within another business or a brand, they're feeling a little bit of resistance there because it's kind of high risk or they could get caught out?
I think you bring up actually one of the most interesting points to me, which is that um, I actually genuinely feel like there is a real leadership vacuum that has been created now, where you're getting different industries with different takes on whether AI content is acceptable, right? So I've talked to agency owners, and they're kind of like, nope, my clients, if they see a whiff of AI, they're kind of like, what am I paying you for? And you're out the door. And I think that's a really dangerous place to be. And I frankly do not necessarily even have advice for you on what to do in that situation, because I think that in those cases, I don't know what happens next. But I do think that for a lot of companies and a lot of leaders, they need to be a little more clear with their employees about what comes next and their view on AI. I think more than anything else, a lot of folks are feeling like, I don't know if this is okay to create stuff in AI. I don't know if you think of it as me being lazy if I'm asking AI to do more of this work. And so when you don't know the answer to that, and you also may feel like, if I do this stuff with AI, am I going to get laid off? I don't know. So I think there's a real vacuum there of information where employees now kind of feel like, I don't know if I should be using this stuff. I don't know if it means that I have a job tomorrow if we continue using this stuff at work. And so I really think that leaders need to figure out what their strategy is sooner rather than later, and be willing to make a mistake, and just try to be as communicative around it. Because what you really want is your team to start using the stuff proactively to try to figure out how to help your business adapt to these like changing environments. And you want to be transparent that, yes, I want you to try this stuff out, but I want you to be the tastemaker. I want you to like flex the reason that you should be working there is because you have excellent taste. That's the reason that you were hired for this role. I want you to apply that to the work that you're creating. If you think it's high quality, great. If you think it's poor, I don't want to see it. Like, that's ultimately the employee's job, I think, in this. The other thing I think also is that for those employees, a lot of the tools that are being developed will help you tackle larger tasks than you've ever tackled before. You're going to be able to generate bigger documents, better stock photo imagery. In many cases, if you're comfortable working in copy and text, let's take that and turn it into AI video. Can we apply it to these different areas? And you're seeing large brands do that stuff anyway. So I kind of feel like a lot of it is just kind of dragging the client along with you for this ride. If Coca-Cola is comfortable putting together a giant AI generated end-to-end video ad where that's really the thing they want to describe, then I start to feel like brands are there. They're just looking for the right guides. And I think leaders need to step up and say, yes, this is going to be acceptable. And they need to start communicating that to their teams.
That's some really interesting points there. I think this whole thing about almost giving yourself permission to do this, it requires collaboration, doesn't it? I think there's a leadership thing here, but there's also a peer-to-peer thing, because I think if you're kind of listening or watching this and you're thinking, yeah, this is me, I can feel it and I can sense that this is where I'm going, and I find myself in this almost this little trap, or could feel like a little bit of a trap. Is what we're saying, do you think, Kabir, that it's time to start talking openly and honestly about this within your business? Because it feels like if everybody's doing the same thing or pulling in the same direction, then we can start to make progress and start to prioritize and figuring out where it's going to work, because it undoubtedly does provide value. It is creative, it is going to improve efficiencies, but it's finding the right places in the business to do that. And that would only happen, wouldn't it, if we collaborate? Is communication the key to all of this?
I think communication is a huge piece of it. I think uh, speaking for myself and like the products that we're building them as team-based collaborative products because as I described at the beginning, context is one of the most important aspects of it. And fundamentally, I think one of the most interesting things about what AI is producing right now is that it feels like creation is converging on language. If you can describe something really accurately, you can now create it. And so what you're finding is that individual roles on a team are also like uh, they have a different vocabulary, right? Copywriters will have a different vocabulary for how to describe something than a project manager, for example. But when you add these different vocabularies together, the outputs are that much better. So instead of just my context of what I do as a founder in a company, it's really important to start pulling in designers, engineers, copywriters, project managers. Let them add their vocabulary because you're going to get better creation out of it. And so I think you're definitely on to something. And I think step one is still very much make it acceptable. Talk to your team. Understand. We don't know where this technology is going. We don't know what it's going to do in the future, but let's start experimenting and trying to adopt it today. Let's figure out what the limitations are. Let's still meet our client obligations, right? If we don't feel like this is going to produce the right output, let's put it away and go back to the tried and true. But don't be afraid to say maybe we did something wrong. Let's try again in the future.
So I loved your idea kind of earlier about the whole kind of sort of building this into again this that word workflow, but almost kind of devoting the time that you described there. I mean, I'm now starting to think this isn't personal time that I need to kind of be blocking out to try this and test this is actually collaborative time. So maybe creating a little kind of work group, or a little kind of once a week, I don't know if it's Friday afternoon, or it's probably the best time for lots of businesses is kind of when you're moving into downtime, so that it doesn't then, as you say, impact on maybe client focused time or customer time, but it still feels like it's really valuable. So maybe a little mastermind group, little workflow
Mhm.
kind of group, just so you can experiment. And hey, I found this, guys. There was this little tool that I spotted. Anybody else seen it? And just kind of dripping that in. And maybe if it is half an hour a week, starting to co-create some ideas around this, and it almost then gathers its own momentum, doesn't it? Do you see this kind of playing out? Because I want to get into the kind of work that you're actually doing directly, Kabir, in terms of Riff Raff and the platform that you're creating. Is it this collaborative thing that is going to be both the instigator of ideas, but also then the output generator? Feels like you're onto a win-win if it is.
Yeah, that's very much the vision for where we're going with Riff Raff specifically. I think the sort of tailwinds that I look at and I think about with what we're building is that um, I do think that there are, as we described at the very top, there's this distribution of folks who try the tech once, and then there's the folks who are just fully on board with it. I think one of the things that, as we described, sort of like team-based AI solutions and collaborative ones, there are multiple people within an org can contribute their own context towards a task. I think about that stuff from the perspective of, you know, we get the best outputs, but if you're watching what other people are doing and how they're prompting AI, you suddenly have this new understanding of, oh, I didn't know I could do that before. And the folks in the org that are more on the high side of it, the ones that are really, really focused on it, suddenly they're not just improving their own output, but everybody on the team is copying those ideas. So you can go hunting for, a 10x employee who's going to just be amazing, but AI can also get you a double across a team of 5 and get you there today. So I think about it from that perspective. I think that teams really need to make that stuff more open. They need to find tools that allow them to share the outputs that they're creating along with the prompts. And people just kind of need to look at it and figure out what's working. Managers should be able to look at a prompt and say, "Wow, this was really good. Like, you generated this. Let's take that. Let's share it with the whole team. Let's let them start applying it to their work." And there you suddenly have, like, managed output. I think the a lot of the stuff that we've been super focused on as an industry with AI is building those initial tools. I think we're in the AI adoption phase where we want everybody to start using the tools. The next stages are going to be more about measuring whether this stuff is working. It's going to be about making sure that people are actually, getting the benefits out of the tools as they're using them. And it's all really, really exciting.
Just want to circle back just for a moment to something you said a few moments ago, which was this whole thing about, the agency client relationship, because a lot of people listening to this will have agencies or third party organizations or companies who are doing a lot of their content creation, say. Let's just use that as an example. That initial reaction, which I guess is very fear-based, that, hey, I'm not going to pay you for just using AI, even though the quality of the output might be absolute genius and it might be absolutely hitting all their KPIs, they might still turn around and say, well, yeah, it doesn't give me value, because how much time are you spending? Well, it's not the time, it's the value that comes out. And we know that, of course, and most people do know that. But is it time then that those kinds of conversations, rather than being quite hostile and kind of very fear-based, actually become more collaborative too? Because I could imagine an agency and a client suddenly realizing, oh yeah, we're going to get the best output and the best value from AI. We need to start talking. We need to start working together. So as a client, rather than saying, you're using AI, agency, get out of here, actually saying, you're using AI, well, we need to co-create those prompts. We need to give you more context and input from actually what's going on in our business. I could just see that any kind of relationship that goes that way, wow, how powerful that could be.
Yeah, I I think that everybody should be having those kinds of conversations. I can also see it being the case where agencies hopefully start, once they, I think, have that foundation that they've built where the workflows work, they're happy with the outputs and they're seeing those results where the content that they're creating is, getting something that's client ready in half the time, that is higher quality than what you would have done just creating it yourself. I think they need to start having those conversations where they refuse to work with clients that do not accept AI generated work, because fundamentally it's like you're asking us to do more work at a lower output at a lower quality bar. And that's like, I don't know what world that is acceptable for results. So, I really do think that it is a burn the boats kind of moment. Like, you need to experiment, you need to figure out what's working. And I think when you get to a place where you feel like, okay, this is better than the status quo that we had before, I think you want to actually really think about, like, should we burn the boats and just focus on this? Like, we're gonna give you the best output quality possible. Um, and I think it's also a great moment for smaller agencies where you suddenly have this new superpower. You can now start tackling much, much bigger projects like that. That really should be the foundation of it, is that, hey, we don't need to be 1,000-person agency anymore in order to affect results. There are a lot of tools, and these tools are now letting us, overpower and outman much, much larger teams.
So there, if you're thinking of the side hustle of doing that little bit of freelance for your family, that freelance work outside of your role, and what Kabir is actually saying is that this could be the perfect storm, that moment where you actually really go for it and actually get some real clients and maybe start to push out a little bit further. It feels like that, doesn't it? It feels like for those people who spot this opportunity or listen to, the kind of the narrative that we're talking about here, they could figure it out very, very quickly, and they could scale very, very quickly. This is almost that we're so close to that seam of gold, aren't we? That if you just keep digging, just an extra couple of little sort of pools here, theme, and we're there. It feels so close, doesn't it?
It definitely does. It feels like there is something that we're, an event horizon, if you want to call it. Like there's this moment that you're going to pass through the eye of something and everything changes beyond that. And frankly, I don't know that that's true, but I think that like you sort of have to treat everything from first principles and just say, yeah, if I'm doing all of the right stuff, success will come. And so I think in this case, you are working with the latest in technology. I think if you adopt the right mindset around what the technology is supposed to do for you and not replace, then I think you have like a very clear path to building something new and bigger. And as I described it, like I think one of the things that I think about with the software that we build is that it's not about human replacement. Like I don't even think of it necessarily as AI software. What I really want to make is human enablement software. I want you to be able to tackle tasks that you never ever dreamed of. If you wanted to go make a high budget movie with special effects and things like that, that's never been possible before without a massive film crew and all of these things. But you kind of have like the inklings of that today. No one's produced anything that high bar yet, but there are AI films that you can totally watch. They're getting there. You can critique it as a filmmaker and look at it and get a sense of it. And I think the best place is that even if you're not trying to make a AAA film, you probably are trying to make something smaller. Like, let's go make a small, funny 30-second ad that touches on a few of these fun ideas. Or I have a really simple idea for a creative that involves things that I would never be able to touch before, right? You've got AI generated imagery. You don't need to go build an entire photo shoot and hire the photographer and on all of this stuff today. You can prove out at a small scale that a concept like this would work before you take it to that next stage. And so I think it gives you a lot more iteration cycles. It gets you much, much closer to something. But yeah, and frankly, everything I just described still involves not needing as many people to go do a task. I think that's part of this, and I really, really hope that the future involves everybody finding not necessarily new purpose, but being able to take their purpose and adapt it to this reality where it's like, let's focus on what you did before and now figure out how to paint a much, much bigger canvas with bigger ideas that you can deliver end to end.
Oh, I feel excited, Kabir. I really do. I think this is just like, oh, it's coming. It's nearly here.
Yeah.
If somebody's listening to this, then and they think, okay, I get this. I'm buying it. I want to be doing this, and then comes into view the word "but." And the word "but" is, but I've got my day job, but I've got all these tasks, but I've got my boss breathing down my neck to complete all these tasks. I don't physically have time in my schedule to be able to block this time out. I don't have necessarily anybody in my business or in my team who is really going to come on this journey with me. But actually, maybe they could if they kind of saw it drip fed to them. But they're also really, really busy, and we're just running around trying to do this week's numbers. We don't have time for this. And of course, you and I will see this a lot, as sort of through our experience. But say it's that person. They may well be using in their businesses, they may well be using some kind of collaboration tool, something like, say, Trello or Slack or something like that. Is there a way of using something like that to kind of really kind of empower this co-creation, either in terms of exploration or in terms of content ideas, or just kind of trying to bond people together in a seamless, very kind of frictionless way, rather than, oh, we've got to have another meeting, we haven't got time for it?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. I feel like that's kind of core to what we're building with Riff, which is it is a Slack based tool. So you basically just add our bot to your Slack server, and you give it a task. So you can type a quick slash command or just DM the bot and basically say, hey, I'm working on this piece of content. And what it'll do is it will create a temporary Slack channel. You can invite everybody on your team in there, and then you can just kind of treat it like a coworker where you feed it the context around that task. I find it's better when you have like a concrete example. Like, so fundamentally, if you're putting together a marketing brief, you can feed it the context of, here's the link to the client's website so they can understand who the client is. You can feed it PDFs, you can feed it writing guides, brand guidelines. it will understand a lot of that stuff. And then you can start feeding it like what you want it to create, as part of that marketing brief. Here's the focus of the brief. I want to have these different sections in the brief. I want to be able to communicate these ideas, and I want to make sure that we describe this one thing. And it will generate that first draft for you. What's really great about this workflow too is that because it's in Slack, you're able to add everybody from your team directly to that channel, and they can start feeding it context as well. If you've got an account exec, they can add in, hey, the client told me this is really important to them. And so all of this information is the stuff that you would normally be talking about in Slack. But by doing it in this task, you have an output ready to go that you can start reviewing. You're at the first draft stage just by having the conversation about what this work was supposed to be. And so we think of that as like that's a fantastic workflow, and it avoids some of those problems I described before, which is everybody's sharing the context in one chat. So you have all of your team's context there. You're not splitting it with 3 different tools. You're talking to the AI while communicating with your team, and it's able to generate better outputs for that reason. So you're at a first draft that's not even, it's not the usual AI slop is the term, but it's really like, no, we've tailored this for the client. Like based on everything you've told me, this is exactly what they want. If you don't think it's right, now use your taste and try to figure out how to fix this and push it into that right direction. But even there, you're really just describing to the bot, this is what I want. And it has a built-in text editor that lets you, actually, I want to change this word to this, and I know exactly what I want here. So I'm just going to do that much faster than trying to describe it. But you get both. And I think it's really fantastic for managers who fundamentally they get back usually a piece of work, right? Like, thank you for generating this marketing brief. They read it, and the first thing they always ask, did you think of this? Did you think of that? And when you start asking that stuff, it's kind of like, if you hand it to somebody with the taste to be able to think of all that stuff, they probably did think of it. They probably even tried it, but they looked at it and they said, actually, it's not good. And I went this other direction because I thought it was better. And when you push all of that stuff into that Slack conversation, you suddenly have like this trail of exactly what the person thought of because they pushed it all to the AI to do and generate. And so you suddenly start having better communication around the task. And then, going back to that manager feeling like, well, there's something wrong here. Here's my feedback to improve it. They're feeding the feedback directly into the chat. Everybody's looking at it going, got it. I understand what could have been done better here. The AI has already updated the document. And so the approval process from beginning to end is so much faster. And the next cycle is going to be better because you've got a bunch of learnings from that conversation. And so that to me is kind of like, that is a fantastic team workflow to get much, much better, high quality output that is done in a fraction of the time it used to take.
That's really, really good. And I just love this whole kind of thing that you're not kind of double counting time. I mean, this is so kind of embedded within a normal kind of conversation that you'd, as you say, within Slack that you'd be having anyway. And because it's kind of almost your AI then becomes, or Riff Raff then becomes that kind of reflective, introspective kind of assistant who's kind of just literally there, not necessarily right in the background, but just on the edge of the conversation, just absorbing absolutely everything to be able to then come back with just this definitive kind of solution or answer. I mean, that's genius. This is really empowering. Yeah, those kinds of human connections and human collaborations, but actually using AI as a really supportive, kind of, I don't want to say tool because it feels like it's so much more than a tool. It's an assistant. It's a proper additional member of the team, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think there's a lot of analogies for best ways to describe AI. I don't know the best way. I think sometimes we want it to react like a coworker, and that's kind of how we describe it here. And I don't want it to replace anybody within that team. Again, it's kind of like you have a coworker, but they have limitations being like they have no taste. So I need everybody else on that Slack chat to be able to say, this is bad, let's make it better. And even there, though, it's like AI can kind of help with that task. You can say, give me 10 headlines for this. It can generate those, but now it has the full context around what everybody is looking for from this document and who the audience is for the document. So the results are better. And because you're there with your team, you can kind of just go, oh yeah, we all clearly agree that the third headline it generated is the best one. So you can just say, let's put in 3, and it will update the document with your brand new headline. And so I think that's kind of like a description of what these new collaborative workflows can look like in the future. And I think there's still a lot more that we can build and do, and I'm really excited about.
I'm sure you are, because it's one of those things that you've proven the concept there in that one channel with this kind of additional little sort of service, and I can imagine you're now thinking. I mean, obviously, there's commercial sensitivities here because we don't want you to be overtaken by anybody else. But I'm guessing you are now thinking of other kind of tools like Slack, potentially other kind of services that are offered around this kind of concept, this kind of central concept of co-creating the prompt engineering, as it were. And yeah, I mean, just it's almost endless, isn't it? How do you kind of keep your kind of, I don't know, stability in all of this? Because you've still got to deliver this first kind of iteration, haven't you, really? How do you not get swept away with all your almost self-hype, because it is so exciting?
Honestly, it's probably just meditation. I think that you really need to find your own North Star and put it down on paper. And I think it has to be one of those things that you can change it, but you really need to be you need to read it and try to remember what you were thinking of when you pointed to it initially, and try to maintain that. I think it's very, very easy. Every time you see an advancement in the market or some change or some difference in the tech, you kind of look at it and go, "Oh, yeah, yeah, we could do that. We could do that." But I really do think, it is a case of maniacal focus, saying no to even like very good ideas. Ideas should be excellent or perfect before you really want to take that and incorporate it into what you're doing. And so I think it's really, really important to, again, like, curation is, I think, a big, big piece of this. So when I see all of these advancements coming, like, a good example I think of it is AI agents in general. I think there's a lot of excitement, a lot of hype around those. I don't think of what we build as an AI agent. I personally find AI agents to be sort of the tail wagging the dog. I think companies that are pushing them tend to think of it as, I'm going to go appeal to a leader at a company. They understand how much they're paying hourly per employee, and if we undercut that price, then we can replace that employee. And I find that very, very, like, that's not good taste to me. I would much rather take the employees that you have, that you're working with in your team, and empower them to deliver much, much better results at a faster pace. So I think that's a much better approach. Fundamentally, I think humans can only manage a certain number of, like, priorities in their head at once, right? It's kind of like I can only remember 7 digits for a number. It's very similar with AI. You're still going to be under that constraint. And so as a leader of a company, what you really still want, I think, is a bunch of humans with fantastic taste to be able to prioritize these different things and say, these are the important things. I might have AI help me and enhance what I'm delivering, but fundamentally, I'm going to be in charge of these 7 things because they are too much to fit into my boss's head. And he's going to trust that I'm going to get them done, and I'll report up to him if I'm running into challenges. And so I think that, to me, feels much more of an organic approach to what we're seeing. Um, and in that world, I don't see, I don't see AI necessarily replacing humans. It may replace specific jobs and specific tasks, but we've seen that repeatedly throughout history. Right? Back in the day when refrigerators were invented, it put a bunch of people who went collecting ice in the mountains and bringing it down. It put them out of business because they no longer had to deliver ice. And likewise, you had, when spreadsheets were first invented, Excel and Lotus 1, 2, 3. Everybody assumed accountants were going away, and I have not replaced my accountant today, even though I'm on the forefront of, like, yes, I should be able to replace it with an AI. I think similarly, I think we're going to find that there's just more work that everybody wants to get done, because you're empowering more people to do more. And so I really do think of it as the limitations of humans are the number of things that we can hold in our head and prioritize. And everything outside of that, we're still going to want people to direct and curate. And AI is going to help those folks deliver more and more of that.
If you like the sound of Kabir's philosophy, and I have to say I'm totally sold on this, Kabir, I really am, you need to be heading over to riffraff.ai. Is that the right place, really, for everyone to head, Kabir?
Yeah, if they'd like to try out Riff, feel free to head there. One of the neat things you can also do, if you're excited about this stuff but really don't know where to start, feel free to book a demo call with me. I'm happy to talk to you about exactly what your workflow is and what your team is set up as. And I'll frankly upfront tell you if Riff is a good fit for your organization or not. Like if it's not, I'm happy to point you to tools that I've tried that might be a better fit to solve the problems that you're running into day to day. I think for me as a founder, learning is the number one priority, and so I learn the most by talking to other people. As I described earlier, like as creation is converging on language, that vocabulary is incredibly important, and I want to speak to more people to learn and grow my vocabulary.
Wow. And here you have it, everybody, successful tech founder who wants to talk to you to learn more about what you need and the vocabulary that you're using. I mean, this is such refreshing stuff. Kabir, honestly, thank you so much for your time and energies today. I think, there's a lot of, kind of real sort of human coming through from the tech here. And I just, I really, really thank you for that, because I think this is what we in the industry need. And particularly, I think marketers are going to find this really refreshing approach. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Neil. It was wonderful being here. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.